Behind the golden gates of Ravencrest Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern politics, secrets flow through marble corridors like whispered prayers. When Crown Prince Alexander discovered that trust could be bought with silver and sold with silence, he learned that even royal blood couldn't protect him from betrayal. What happened on that stormy October night would shake the very foundations of the Eldonian monarchy, forcing a future king to choose between family loyalty and the crown's survival. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The rain hammered against the towering windows of Ravencrest Palace with unusual fury, as if nature itself sensed the turmoil brewing within the ancient walls. Crown Prince Alexander stood in his private study, his reflection ghost-like in the storm-darkened glass. At 32, he possessed the commanding presence expected of a future king, yet tonight uncertainty clouded his typically confident demeanor. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner chimed 11 times, its deep resonance echoing through the spacious room lined with leather-bound volumes and priceless artifacts. Alexander had been pacing for the better part of an hour, his mind wrestling with information that threatened to unravel everything he believed about his family. 3 days earlier, his most trusted security advisor, Colonel James Hartwell, had approached him with disturbing intelligence. Whispers among the palace staff suggested that someone within the inner circle was feeding sensitive information to tabloid journalists. The leak had already resulted in several embarrassing stories about minor royal indiscretions, but Hartwell feared something far more damaging was brewing. Alexander's phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. A text from his younger sister, Princess Victoria. "Alex, we need to talk. Tonight. Something's happening that you need to know about." Victoria, 28 and fiercely intelligent, worked as a cultural attaché but maintained an extensive network of contacts throughout European high society. If she had information, it was likely credible and urgent. Within minutes, Victoria appeared at his study door, her usually immaculate blonde hair slightly disheveled from hurrying through the palace corridors. She wore a simple black dress, having apparently left some official function early. "Close the door," Alexander instructed, noting the worry lines etched around her green eyes. Victoria complied, then moved to the window, checking the gardens below before turning back to her brother. "Alex, I received a call tonight from Lady Margaret Thornfield. You remember her from the charity gala last month?" Alexander nodded. Lady Margaret was a prominent socialite known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue. She moved in circles that included both royalty and media moguls. "Margaret was at a private dinner party this evening," Victoria continued, lowering her voice despite their privacy. "She overheard something that made her blood run cold. Apparently, someone has been systematically photographing private documents in the palace. Not just any documents, Alex. Strategic briefings, family correspondence, even medical records." The prince felt ice forming in his stomach. "Who?" "That's just it. Margaret couldn't identify the person, but she heard enough to know they were discussing a major exposé planned for this weekend. Something they called Operation Crownfall. The target isn't just scandal, Alex. They're aiming to destabilize the monarchy itself." Alexander sank into his leather chair, the weight of the revelation settling over him like a shroud. The kingdom of Eldonia had weathered many storms throughout its 800-year history, but the modern era brought new vulnerabilities. In an age of social media and instant communication, even a single damaging story could spiral into a constitutional crisis. "There's more," Victoria said, moving closer to the desk. "Margaret mentioned hearing a name. Someone referred to as the Nightingale. Apparently, this person has unprecedented access to the royal quarters." The nickname sent a chill through Alexander. The royal quarters were supposed to be the most secure area of the palace, accessible only to immediate family members and a select group of trusted staff who had undergone extensive background checks. "Have you told anyone else about this?" Victoria shook her head. "I came straight to you." "But, Alex, if someone with that level of access is involved, we're talking about a betrayal that goes to the very heart of our security apparatus." Alexander stood and moved to the wall safe hidden behind a portrait of their grandfather, King Edmund III. Inside, among other sensitive documents, he kept a list of everyone with access to the royal quarters. The list was surprisingly short: immediate family members, the Queen Mother, 2 personal secretaries, the head of palace security, 3 housekeeping supervisors, and the royal physician. As he reviewed the names, each representing someone he had known and trusted for years, Alexander felt the foundation of his world shifting. One of these people had chosen to betray everything the monarchy represented. "We need to be extremely careful about how we proceed," he told Victoria. "If we tip our hand too early, the Nightingale could destroy evidence or accelerate their timeline." Victoria nodded, understanding the delicate nature of their situation. "What do you want to do?" Before Alexander could respond, a soft knock echoed from the study door. Both siblings froze, wondering who would disturb the prince's private quarters at such a late hour. "Come in," Alexander called, quickly returning the access list to the safe. The door opened to reveal Queen Isabella, Alexander's stepmother and the king's second wife. At 55, she maintained an elegant bearing that had made her a popular figure both within Eldonia and internationally. She wore a silk robe over her nightgown, suggesting she had already retired for the evening. "Alexander, Victoria," she said, her accent carrying just a hint of her Italian heritage. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I noticed lights in the study and voices. Is everything all right?" The timing of her appearance struck both siblings as curious. Isabella had never been one to check on them personally, typically communicating through staff or formal channels. "Just discussing some upcoming engagements," Alexander replied carefully, studying his stepmother's expression for any sign of deception. Isabella smiled, but something in her dark eyes seemed guarded. "Of course. I actually wanted to speak with you both about the state dinner next week. There have been some last-minute changes to the guest list that require our attention." For the next 20 minutes, Isabella discussed various diplomatic considerations and protocol adjustments. Her knowledge of the details was impressive, demonstrating the thorough preparation that had made her an effective queen consort. Yet Alexander found himself analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for hidden meanings. When Isabella finally departed, wishing them both good night, Victoria waited until her footsteps faded down the corridor before speaking. "That was strange," she whispered. "Isabella never involves herself in operational details to that extent." Alexander nodded, his suspicions growing. "And the timing was convenient. Almost as if she wanted to know what we were discussing." The storm outside was beginning to subside, but the tempest within the palace walls was just beginning. Alexander realized that the next few days would test not only his judgment but his ability to protect the institution he was born to serve. As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Alex, there's one more thing Margaret mentioned. The person organizing this operation isn't working alone. They have connections to foreign intelligence services. This isn't just about damaging our reputation. Someone wants to destabilize Eldonia itself." The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. The Kingdom of Eldonia, despite its small size, occupied a strategically important position in European politics. Its neutrality in various conflicts and its role as a financial hub made it valuable to multiple international interests. A weakened or destabilized monarchy could create opportunities for outside manipulation. After Victoria left, Alexander stood alone in his study, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him with unprecedented force. He had always known that becoming king would require difficult decisions, but he had never imagined that his first major crisis would involve suspecting his own family and closest advisors of treason. The grandfather clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of what Alexander sensed would be the most challenging period of his life. Outside, the storm clouds were clearing, revealing a full moon that cast long shadows across the palace grounds. But, inside the ancient walls of Ravencrest Palace, darkness was just beginning to gather. He made a decision that would alter the course of events dramatically. Tomorrow, he would begin his own investigation, using resources and methods that even his security team wouldn't expect. The Crown Prince of Eldonia was about to become a detective in his own home, hunting for a traitor who had already proven capable of penetrating the most secure areas of the palace. The game of royal intrigue had begun, and Alexander was determined to win, whatever the cost to himself or his family. The survival of the monarchy itself hung in the balance. Dawn broke gray and, subdued over Ravencrest Palace, the aftermath of the previous night's storm leaving the garden scattered with fallen leaves and broken branches. Crown Prince Alexander had managed only 2 hours of restless sleep before rising to begin what he privately called Operation Shepherd, his covert investigation into the palace's security breach. His first stop was the palace's extensive security center, located 3 floors below the main structure. The underground facility housed banks of monitors displaying feeds from hundreds of cameras positioned throughout the palace and grounds. More importantly, it contained the digital archives of all entry and exit logs dating back 5 years. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the night security supervisor, looked surprised to see the Crown Prince at 7 in the morning. A former military intelligence officer, Mitchell had served the royal family for 8 years with unwavering loyalty and discretion. "Your Highness," she said, standing immediately. "How may I assist you this morning?" "Captain, I need you to prepare a confidential analysis for me," Alexander said, ensuring they were alone in the monitoring room. "I want detailed access reports for the royal quarters over the past 6 months. Every entry, every exit, with timestamps and authorization codes." Mitchell's professional demeanor never wavered, but Alexander caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she understood the serious nature of his request. "Certainly, Your Highness. May I ask if this relates to a specific security concern?" "It does, but I need absolute discretion on this matter." "Can you have the report ready by this afternoon?" "Of course. I'll prepare it personally." As Alexander left the security center, he reflected on the challenge ahead. The Nightingale had managed to operate undetected for months, suggesting either sophisticated knowledge of palace security protocols or assistance from someone with legitimate access. His next destination was the palace library, a vast repository containing not just books but historical documents, family papers, and archives dating back centuries. If someone was photographing sensitive documents, they needed to access them first, and many of the most damaging materials would be found here. The library occupied an entire wing of the palace's eastern section, with soaring ceilings supported by marble columns and reading areas bathed in natural light from massive windows. Professor Elena Vesquez, the head librarian and royal archivist, had dedicated her life to preserving the monarchy's historical records. "Prince Alexander," she said warmly as he entered her office, a cozy space surrounded by rare books and manuscripts. "What brings you to the archive so early?" "Elena, I'm researching our family's historical responses to internal threats," Alexander said, choosing his words carefully. "Specifically, I'm interested in how previous monarchs dealt with breaches of trust within the royal household." Professor Vasquez raised an eyebrow but moved immediately to assist. "An intriguing topic. Are you thinking of a particular historical period?" "Actually, I'm more interested in recent history. The past decade or so. I'd like to review any sensitive documents that might be of interest to outside parties." As Elena gathered various files and documents, Alexander noticed a detail that made his pulse quicken. On her desk was a small digital camera, the type commonly used for document preservation. It was perfectly innocent. Librarians regularly digitized important documents for preservation purposes. But it also represented exactly the kind of equipment the Nightingale would need. "Elena, that camera, is it new?" "Oh yes, we acquired it last month for a digitization project. Much more efficient than the old equipment." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the archive's modernization efforts," Alexander replied, but privately noted the timeline. The security breaches had reportedly begun around the same time. Spending 2 hours reviewing historical documents gave Alexander valuable insight into the types of materials that could damage the monarchy if made public. Financial records, diplomatic correspondence, and private family communications all represented potential weapons in the wrong hands. As noon approached, Alexander made his way to the palace's main dining room for lunch with his father, King Frederick IV. The monarch, at 68, remained sharp and engaged despite recent health concerns that had accelerated discussions about succession planning. The dining room reflected 8 centuries of royal tradition, with portraits of previous monarchs lining the walls and a massive crystal chandelier casting elegant light across the polished table. Today, only 2 places were set, suggesting a private father-son meal. Alexander, the king said as his son entered. You look troubled. Is everything well? For a moment, Alexander considered sharing his concerns with his father. King Frederick's experience and wisdom would be invaluable in navigating the current crisis. However, the investigation was still in its early stages, and Alexander worried about creating unnecessary alarm. Just the usual pressures, father. The upcoming state visit requires considerable preparation. King Frederick studied his son's face with the penetrating gaze that had served him well through 4 decades of rule. I've learned to recognize when you're carrying a heavier burden than usual. If there's something I should know. Before Alexander could respond, Queen Isabella entered the dining room, elegant as always in a navy blue dress that complemented her silver jewelry. Her timing seemed coincidental, but Alexander was beginning to question all coincidences. Frederick, Alexander, she said, kissing both men on the cheek. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, the king replied. Please, join us. As they dined on expertly prepared salmon and seasonal vegetables, the conversation flowed through various topics: upcoming charitable events, parliamentary developments, and international relations. Isabella contributed knowledgeably to each discussion, demonstrating the thorough preparation that had characterized her decade as queen consort. Yet Alexander found himself studying her words and mannerisms with new scrutiny. When she mentioned specific details about diplomatic communications, he wondered how she had access to such information. When she referenced private conversations between himself and various ministers, he questioned who might have briefed her. Isabella, he said during a lull in conversation, your knowledge of current diplomatic initiatives is impressive. Do you receive regular briefings on these matters? She smiled gracefully. I make it my business to stay informed. A queen must understand the kingdom's position in world affairs. Of course. I was simply curious about your information sources. Something flickered in Isabella's eyes, so briefly that Alexander might have imagined it. Various sources, naturally. Ministers, ambassadors, staff reports. Information flows freely in a palace. After lunch, Alexander returned to the security center to collect Captain Mitchell's report. The document was thorough and troubling. During the past 6 months, there had been numerous late-night entries to the royal quarters, all apparently authorized but occurring at unusual hours when most staff would be off duty. What made the pattern particularly suspicious was that many of these entries occurred on nights when significant documents had been accessed from the archives or when important meetings had taken place in the royal quarters. Captain, Alexander said after reviewing the report, these late-night entries, who authorized them? Mitchell consulted her files. The authorizations came through standard channels, Your Highness. Emergency access codes, typically used for urgent maintenance or security checks. But, who specifically requested these accesses? That's where it becomes interesting, sir. The requests were submitted through the Queen Consort's office. Alexander felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align in a pattern he desperately hoped was wrong. Isabella had access to sensitive information, possessed the authority to authorize security entries, and had been present at several moments when his investigation might have been compromised. The afternoon brought a scheduled meeting with Colonel Hartwell, his chief security advisor. They met in a small conference room adjacent to Alexander's office, a space routinely swept for surveillance devices. Colonel, I need to discuss a hypothetical scenario with you, Alexander began. If someone within the royal household were systematically gathering intelligence for outside parties, how would you recommend we investigate? Hartwell, a veteran of military intelligence, understood immediately that this was not entirely hypothetical. Your Highness, such an investigation would require extreme delicacy. We'd need to avoid alerting the subject while gathering concrete evidence. What kind of evidence would be necessary? Ideally, we'd want documentation of unauthorized information gathering, evidence of communication with outside parties, and proof of the information being transmitted. Digital forensics would be crucial. Alexander nodded, appreciating the colonel's professional approach. How long would such an investigation typically require? With proper resources and cooperation, perhaps a week to 10 days. However, if the subject has high-level access and sophisticated knowledge of security protocols, it could take considerably longer. As evening approached, Alexander realized that his investigation had reached a critical juncture. The evidence was circumstantial but pointing toward a conclusion he found deeply disturbing. If Queen Isabella was indeed the Nightingale, the implications extended far beyond simple betrayal. A foreign queen consorting with outside intelligence services represented a threat not just to the royal family but to national security itself. The information she could access included sensitive diplomatic communications, defense briefings, and strategic planning documents. That night, Alexander made a decision that would escalate the situation dramatically. He would set a trap, using false information to test his suspicions. If Isabella was indeed the traitor, she would soon reveal herself through her own actions. The Crown Prince spent the evening crafting a fictional but believable scenario, a secret negotiation with a neighboring country that would interest foreign intelligence services. He would share this information selectively and monitor how quickly it might surface in unauthorized channels. As midnight approached once again, Alexander stood at his study window, looking out over the palace grounds. Somewhere in the darkness, the Nightingale was preparing for another nocturnal operation. Within days, the hunter and the hunted would finally come face to face. The game was accelerating, and Alexander knew that his next moves would determine not just his own future but the fate of the monarchy itself. The third day of Prince Alexander's covert investigation dawned with deceptive tranquility. The palace staff moved through their morning routines unaware that their future king was methodically laying a trap that would expose the most dangerous security breach in the monarchy's modern history. Alexander had spent the early hours crafting his deception with the precision of a master strategist. The fictional intelligence he planned to use as bait involved a supposedly secret economic agreement between Eldonia and the neighboring Republic of Valeria, a deal that would grant Valeria access to Eldonian banking systems in exchange for military cooperation. Such an arrangement would be of tremendous interest to several foreign intelligence services. His first challenge was determining how to introduce this false information in a way that would reach the Nightingale without arousing suspicion. After considerable thought, Alexander decided to stage a seemingly private conversation with his economic advisor, Minister Richard Ashford, in the palace library where Elena Vasquez would naturally overhear portions of their discussion. At 10 that morning, Alexander met Minister Ashford in the library's reading room. Ashford, a brilliant economist in his early 50s, had served the royal family for over a decade. Alexander had briefed him on the general nature of the operation without revealing his specific suspicions about Queen Isabella. "Minister," Alexander said, ensuring his voice carried to Elena's nearby office, "I need your absolute discretion regarding the Valerian negotiations. The defense implications are too sensitive for normal channels." Ashford, understanding his role in the performance, responded appropriately. "Of course, Your Highness. The banking access provisions alone require the highest level of security." They continued their fabricated discussion for 20 minutes, carefully planting details that would make the false intelligence both believable and valuable to foreign agents. Alexander noticed Elena moving about her office, occasionally passing close enough to their conversation area to overhear key details. The second phase of Alexander's trap involved creating a physical document that the Nightingale could photograph. Working with Minister Ashford, he produced an authentic-looking briefing paper complete with official seals and classification markings. The document outlined the fictional Valerian agreement in sufficient detail to be compelling while including subtle markers that would allow Alexander to trace its unauthorized reproduction. Alexander placed the document in his private safe, but not before ensuring that Queen Isabella became aware of its existence. During their afternoon tea, a long-standing family tradition, he mentioned to both Isabella and his father that he was reviewing highly classified materials related to regional security. "Father," he said, carefully modulating his tone to suggest importance without obvious drama, "the Valerian situation requires some delicate decision-making. I've prepared a comprehensive briefing that I'd like you to review tomorrow." King Frederick nodded with interest. "Certainly. How sensitive are these materials?" "Extremely. I've secured them in my private safe for now." Alexander watched Isabella's reaction carefully. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but he noticed her fingers tighten slightly around her teacup, a subtle sign of increased attention.
Will this affect our upcoming diplomatic schedule?
Isabella asked, her question appearing naturally concerned with her official duties.
Possibly, Alexander replied.
We may need to adjust some protocols depending on how negotiations develop.
That evening, Alexander implemented the most crucial element of his trap.
Working with Captain Mitchell, he arranged for enhanced monitoring of the royal quarters, including invisible ultraviolet marking of the documents in his safe. If anyone handled these papers, they would carry traces detectable only under special lighting.
The waiting began at sunset.
Alexander positioned himself in his study with a clear view of the corridor leading to his quarters. Captain Mitchell monitored the security feeds from her command center, maintaining constant communication through a discreet earpiece.
At 11:30, Alexander's patience was rewarded.
His earpiece crackled with Mitchell's whispered report, movement in the corridor.
Subject approaching your quarters.
Through his partially open door, Alexander caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette moving carefully down the hallway. The figure wore dark clothing and moved with practiced stealth, clearly familiar with the palace's security protocols. His heart sank as recognition dawned. Queen Isabella approached his door with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone whose presence would never be questioned by passing guards.
Alexander watched through the crack in his door as Isabella produced a sophisticated electronic device from her pocket.
The small apparatus appeared to be designed for bypassing security systems, technology that would be available only to professional intelligence operatives. Within minutes, Isabella had gained access to Alexander's private quarters. Through the security monitors that Captain Mitchell was relaying to his phone, Alexander watched his stepmother move directly to his private safe. Her knowledge of its location and operation confirmed that this was not her first unauthorized entry. The Queen Consort opened the safe with disturbing efficiency, immediately locating the fabricated Valerian documents. She photographed each page methodically, using a high-quality camera equipped with specialized lighting to ensure clear reproduction even in low-light conditions. Alexander felt a mixture of vindication and profound sadness as he watched the woman who had been part of his family for over a decade methodically betray everything the monarchy represented.
The personal dimension of the betrayal was almost as devastating as its implications for national security.
After completing her photography, Isabella restored the documents to their exact original positions and closed the safe. Her professionalism was evident in every movement. She left no trace of her presence that casual observation would detect. As Isabella prepared to leave Alexander's quarters, she paused, checking her watch and consulting her phone. The pause suggested she was coordinating with someone else, confirming that this operation involved external handlers. Alexander waited until Isabella had returned to her own quarters before moving. His immediate priority was documenting the evidence of her intrusion without alerting her to his knowledge of her activities. Working with Captain Mitchell, he retrieved the documents from his safe and confirmed that they had been handled. Under ultraviolet light, Isabella's fingerprints glowed clearly on the papers, providing undeniable proof of her unauthorized access. The photographs from the security cameras showed Isabella's entire operation, creating a comprehensive record of her espionage activities. However, Alexander knew that this evidence, while convincing, was only the beginning of a much larger investigation.
The following morning brought an urgent encrypted message that Colonel Hartwell delivered personally to Alexander's study.
Intelligence services in 2 neighboring countries had reported unusual communications traffic suggesting that sensitive information about Eldonian security arrangements was circulating in unauthorized channels. "Your Highness," Hartwell said grimly, "it appears that whoever is responsible for these leaks has accelerated their operations. We're seeing increased intelligence activity that suggests preparation for some kind of major action."
Alexander realized that Isabella's theft of the Valerian documents represented more than simple espionage.
The pattern of intelligence gathering suggested preparation for a coordinated operation designed to destabilize the monarchy. That afternoon, Alexander made the most difficult decision of his life. Despite the personal pain it would cause his father and the potential scandal for the royal family, he could no longer delay taking action against Queen Isabella. Working with Colonel Hartwell and Captain Mitchell, Alexander planned a careful operation to gather additional evidence while preventing Isabella from causing further damage. They would monitor her communications, document her contacts, and prepare for her eventual confrontation. However, their planning was interrupted by an urgent development that changed everything. Princess Victoria burst into Alexander's study with news that sent chills through everyone present. "Alex," she said breathlessly, "I just received another call from Lady Margaret. She's heard that the exposé is scheduled for this weekend. They're calling it Operation Crown Fall, and it's designed to be devastating enough to force Father's abdication." The revelation that Isabella's espionage was part of a coordinated campaign to remove King Frederick from power elevated the situation from betrayal to outright treason. Alexander understood that they were no longer dealing with simple intelligence gathering but with a sophisticated plot to overthrow the monarchy. As the pieces of the conspiracy became clear, Alexander realized that the next 48 hours would determine the fate of the royal family and the kingdom of Eldonia itself. The Nightingale had been exposed, but the full scope of the threat was only beginning to emerge. The Crown Prince of Eldonia was about to face the greatest challenge of his life, one that would test not only his courage but his ability to save the institution he was destined to lead. The revelation that Queen Isabella's espionage was part of a coordinated assault on the monarchy transformed Prince Alexander's investigation from a search for truth into a desperate race against time. With less than 48 hours before Operation Crown Fall was scheduled to launch, Alexander knew that every decision could determine whether the Eldonian royal family survived or fell. Working through the night, Alexander assembled a crisis response team consisting of Colonel Hartwell, Captain Mitchell, and Minister Ashford. They established their command center in the palace's secure communications room, a facility originally designed for wartime operations and equipped with encrypted communication systems and surveillance detection equipment. "Gentlemen," Captain Mitchell, Alexander addressed his team as dawn broke over the palace, "we're facing a coordinated attack on the monarchy that extends far beyond simple intelligence gathering. Our priority is preventing the planned exposé while documenting enough evidence to neutralize the threat permanently." Colonel Hartwell spread several intelligence reports across the conference table. "Your Highness, our analysis suggests that at least 3 foreign intelligence services are coordinating this operation. The goal appears to be creating enough scandal and constitutional crisis to force King Frederick's abdication and potentially dissolve the monarchy entirely." The implications were staggering. Eldonia's strategic position in European finance and its traditional neutrality in international conflicts made it valuable to various powers. A destabilized or eliminated monarchy could open opportunities for outside influence that would reshape the regional balance of power. "What kind of information do they have?" Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. Captain Mitchell consulted her digital tablet. "Based on our security analysis and the pattern of document access, they potentially have diplomatic correspondence, defense briefings, financial records, and personal family communications spanning several years." Alexander felt the weight of the crisis settling over him like a physical burden. The stolen information could be weaponized to create multiple scandals simultaneously, overwhelming the royal family's ability to respond effectively. Minister Ashford raised a crucial point. "Your Highness, we also need to consider the timing. This weekend's state dinner includes heads of government from 6 European nations. If the exposé launches while these leaders are present, it could create an immediate diplomatic crisis that would force rapid political decisions." The state dinner represented both a vulnerability and an opportunity. While the presence of foreign leaders would amplify any scandal, it also meant that the palace's security would be at maximum levels, providing cover for more aggressive countermeasures. "Colonel," Alexander said, "I need you to coordinate with intelligence services in allied nations. We need to understand the full scope of this operation and identify all participants." As Hartwell moved to implement the prince's instructions, Alexander turned his attention to the most painful aspect of the crisis, confronting Queen Isabella. Despite the overwhelming evidence of her betrayal, he recognized that simply arresting her could trigger the very crisis they were trying to prevent. The Queen Consort maintained extensive connections throughout European high society, and her sudden disappearance would generate immediate media attention. Moreover, if she was operating under foreign intelligence direction, her handlers might have contingency plans that would accelerate the timeline for Operation Crown Fall. Alexander decided on a strategy that balanced risk with potential reward. Rather than confronting Isabella directly, he would feed her false information designed to disrupt the planned exposé while continuing to monitor her activities. Working with Minister Ashford, Alexander prepared a second set of fabricated documents suggesting that the royal family had become aware of foreign intelligence operations and was preparing countermeasures. If Isabella transmitted this information to her handlers, it might force them to delay or cancel their planned operation. The deception required careful orchestration. Alexander arranged for a meeting with his father that afternoon, ensuring that Isabella would learn of discussions about enhanced security protocols and diplomatic countermeasures. The goal was to create enough uncertainty among the conspirators to buy additional time for Alexander's own preparations. King Frederick, when finally briefed on the situation, displayed the steady composure that had characterized his 40-year reign. The revelation that his wife of 10 years had been systematically betraying the royal family caused him visible pain, but he immediately focused on protecting the monarchy. "Alexander," the king said after absorbing the full scope of the crisis, "what do you need from me?" "Father, we need to maintain normal appearances while documenting everything. Isabella cannot suspect that we know about her activities." The king nodded, though Alexander could see the emotional toll the situation was taking. "What about the state dinner? Should we consider cancellation?" "Actually, I believe we should proceed as planned. The enhanced security provides cover for our operations, and canceling would signal that something significant is wrong." That afternoon's implementation of their deception proved successful beyond expectations. During tea with the royal family, Alexander and King Frederick discussed the fabricated security concerns while Isabella listened with apparent casual interest. However, security monitors later showed her making an encrypted phone call immediately after the meeting concluded. The interception of Isabella's communications provided crucial intelligence about the scope of Operation Crown Fall. Working with National Intelligence Services, Alexander's team decoded enough of her transmissions to understand that the planned exposé involved synchronized releases across multiple media outlets in 6 countries. The stolen information had been compiled into a comprehensive attack designed to overwhelm the royal family's ability to respond. Personal scandals would be combined with allegations of corruption and diplomatic impropriety, creating a narrative of systemic failure that would justify calls for the monarchy's abolition. More disturbing still was the discovery that Isabella's handlers had prepared contingency plans for various royal responses. They had anticipated potential countermeasures and developed strategies for escalating the crisis regardless of how the royal family initially reacted. As Thursday evening approached, Alexander realized that his strategy of disruption and delay was having the desired effect. Intelligence intercepts suggested growing uncertainty among the conspirators about whether their operation had been compromised. However, this success created a new challenge. If Isabella's handlers suspected that their operation was known, they might accelerate their timeline or implement more aggressive measures. The Queen Consort herself represented a significant security risk if she became desperate. Colonel Hartwell brought this concern to Alexander's attention during their evening briefing. "Your Highness, if the Queen Consort believes her position is compromised, she might attempt to flee the country. Her departure would signal that something major is wrong and could trigger media speculation that serves the conspirators' purposes." Alexander understood the dilemma. They needed to maintain the illusion of normalcy while preventing Isabella from either escaping or causing additional damage. The solution required a level of sophistication that would test every aspect of their crisis management capabilities. The decision he reached that evening represented the most complex operation of his life. Rather than simply preventing Operation Crown Fall, Alexander chose to use the conspiracy against itself, turning Isabella's espionage activities into a weapon for protecting the monarchy. Working through the night, his team prepared a counter-operation that would expose the foreign intelligence involvement while minimizing damage to the royal family. They would allow the exposé to proceed but control its timing and content, ensuring that the focus shifted from royal scandal to foreign interference in Eldonian affairs. The plan was audacious and dangerous, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. However, Alexander understood that half measures would no longer suffice. The Kingdom of Aldonia faced an existential threat that demanded extraordinary responses. As Friday morning dawned, the Crown Prince of Aldonia prepared to implement an operation that would either save the monarchy or destroy it completely. The next 24 hours would determine not just his own future but the survival of an institution that had guided the kingdom for 8 centuries. The final act of the royal conspiracy was about to begin, and Alexander was determined to ensure that when it concluded, the crown would remain secure and the threats to Aldonia would be neutralized permanently. Part 5 Friday morning arrived with the deceptive calm that often precedes monumental events. Prince Alexander stood in his private study, reviewing the final details of what would either be his greatest triumph or the end of the Eldonian monarchy. Outside his windows, the palace grounds bustled with preparation for the evening state dinner, unaware that the very foundations of the kingdom hung in the balance. The counter-operation Alexander had designed, codenamed Operation Lighthouse, represented a masterpiece of strategic deception. Rather than simply preventing the planned exposé, he intended to transform it into evidence of foreign interference while simultaneously exposing the full network of conspirators. Colonel Hartwell entered the study carrying encrypted communications that had been intercepted throughout the night. "Your Highness, the intelligence picture is becoming clearer. We've identified coordination centers in 3 countries, all preparing for synchronized release of compromising materials this evening." Alexander examined the intelligence reports, noting the sophisticated level of planning involved. The conspirators had prepared backup communication channels, alternative media contacts, and contingency plans for various royal responses. Their operation demonstrated the resources and expertise typical of state-sponsored intelligence activities. "Colonel, what's the status of our media contacts?" "Fully briefed and standing by, sir. When you give the signal, they're prepared to release the story of foreign intelligence operations targeting the monarchy." The key to Operation Lighthouse lay in timing. Alexander's team would allow Isabella to transmit one final batch of stolen information to her handlers, but this transmission would be monitored and documented by multiple intelligence services. When the foreign-sponsored exposé launched, Alexander would immediately counter with evidence of the conspiracy itself. Queen Isabella's activities that morning confirmed that the original timeline remained unchanged. Security monitors showed her accessing sensitive documents from the archives, photographing materials in her private quarters, and making encrypted communications with her handlers. At noon, Alexander received confirmation that Isabella had transmitted what she believed were authentic defense briefings to her foreign contacts. In reality, these documents had been carefully crafted to appear genuine while containing subtle indicators that would help identify their unauthorized distribution. The afternoon brought an unexpected development that threatened to derail Alexander's carefully orchestrated plan. Princess Victoria arrived at his study with urgent news that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. "Alex," she said breathlessly, "I just spoke with Lady Margaret again. She's learned that the exposé isn't just targeting father. They're planning to implicate you as well, suggesting that you've been complicit in covering up royal corruption." The revelation that Alexander himself was a target added a personal dimension to the crisis that he hadn't anticipated. The conspirators weren't simply trying to destabilize the monarchy, they were attempting to eliminate the entire line of succession. "What specifically are they alleging?" Alexander asked, though he suspected the answer would be both creative and damaging. Victoria consulted notes from her conversation with Lady Margaret. "They claim to have evidence that you've been aware of financial irregularities, diplomatic improprieties, and even Isabella's activities. They're portraying you as either incompetent or complicit." Alexander realized that the scope of Operation Crown Fall was even more ambitious than he had understood. By implicating both the current king and the heir apparent, the conspirators were creating conditions for a complete constitutional crisis that could lead to the monarchy's abolition. This revelation forced a critical adjustment to Operation Lighthouse. Alexander could no longer afford to allow any part of the planned exposé to proceed, as even partial success could permanently damage his credibility and ability to inherit the throne. Working with unprecedented urgency, Alexander's team modified their counter-operation to launch preemptively. Rather than waiting for the exposé to begin, they would strike first, exposing the conspiracy before it could cause irreparable damage. Colonel Hartwell coordinated with intelligence services across Europe to ensure simultaneous release of evidence documenting foreign interference in Eldonian affairs. The story would focus on attempts to manipulate the kingdom's neutral status and destabilize its government through disinformation campaigns. At 4 in the afternoon, as guests began arriving for the evening state dinner, Alexander made the decision that would define his future reign. He authorized the immediate implementation of Operation Lighthouse, turning Isabella's conspiracy into the means of its own destruction. The first phase involved confronting Queen Isabella directly. Alexander found her in her private sitting room, reviewing what appeared to be final preparations for her evening duties as hostess for the state dinner. "Isabella," he said, closing the door behind him, "we need to discuss your recent activities." For a moment, the queen consort maintained her composed facade, but Alexander could see recognition dawning in her eyes. She understood that her decade-long deception had finally been discovered. "I'm not sure what you mean, Alexander." "I mean your work as an intelligence operative for foreign governments. I mean the documents you've stolen, the communications you've intercepted, and your role in Operation Crownfall." Isabella's careful composure cracked as she realized the futility of continued deception. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document everything. Long enough to turn your operation against itself." The confession that followed revealed the stunning scope of Isabella's betrayal. She had been recruited before her marriage to King Frederick, specifically positioned to provide long-term intelligence access to the highest levels of the Eldonian government. "They promised me that exposing royal corruption would lead to democratic reform," Isabella said, though her words carried little conviction. "They said the monarchy was an anachronism that prevented Eldonia from reaching its full potential." Alexander understood that Isabella had been manipulated as much as she had manipulated others. Foreign intelligence services had exploited her idealistic beliefs while using her to advance their own strategic objectives. "Isabella, your handlers were never interested in democratic reform. They wanted to destabilize Eldonia to create opportunities for outside influence. You've been used." As evening approached and guests gathered for the state dinner, Alexander's counter-operation reached its climax. Across Europe, major media outlets began publishing coordinated stories about foreign intelligence operations targeting neutral countries. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded communications, documented financial transfers, and testimony from intelligence sources created an irrefutable narrative of foreign interference. Isabella's activities were presented as part of a broader campaign against European neutrality and democratic institutions. The timing was perfect. As world leaders sat down to dinner at Ravencrest Palace, news broke of attempts to manipulate their host government through espionage and disinformation. The story dominated international headlines, positioning King Frederick not as a scandal-plagued monarch but as the target of foreign subversion. Isabella's arrest came quietly during the dinner's second course. While guests enjoyed expertly prepared cuisine and diplomatic conversation, Queen Consort Isabella was taken into custody by palace security. Her decade-long masquerade finally concluded. King Frederick handled the immediate crisis with characteristic dignity, informing the gathered leaders that Eldonia had successfully countered foreign intelligence operations while maintaining its commitment to neutrality and democratic values. The international response exceeded Alexander's most optimistic expectations. Rather than viewing the royal family as compromised, world leaders praised the effective counterintelligence operation and offered support for Eldonia's continued independence. Over the following days, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Intelligence services in multiple countries had coordinated to target several neutral nations, using recruited assets to gather information and create instability. Isabella had been one of many such assets, though her position had made her particularly valuable. The aftermath brought both personal pain and institutional strength to the royal family. King Frederick's heartbreak over Isabella's betrayal was evident, but his handling of the crisis enhanced his reputation both domestically and internationally. For Alexander, the experience provided crucial preparation for his future role as king. He had demonstrated the strategic thinking, crisis management skills, and moral courage necessary to protect Eldonia's independence and democratic institutions. The palace locks were indeed changed, but, more importantly, the entire security infrastructure was overhauled to prevent future infiltration. New protocols, enhanced screening procedures, and improved intelligence sharing created multiple layers of protection for the monarchy. As weeks passed and the immediate crisis faded into history, Alexander reflected on the lessons learned from his confrontation with the Nightingale. The experience had taught him that modern monarchy required not just ceremonial grace but strategic sophistication and unwavering commitment to the nation's welfare. The Kingdom of Eldonia emerged from the crisis stronger and more secure than before. The royal family's successful defense against foreign manipulation demonstrated their continued relevance and effectiveness in protecting the nation's interests. Alexander's investigation had begun with suspicious palace access and stolen documents. It concluded with the exposure of an international conspiracy and the strengthening of Eldonian democracy. The future king had proven himself worthy of the crown he would inherit, earning the respect of his people and the admiration of world leaders. The Nightingale's song had ended in silence, but the royal institution it had attempted to destroy sang more clearly than ever, its voice carrying the eternal promise of service, duty, and protection for the Kingdom of Eldonia.